Well, good morning, everybody, and it's a real privilege to be the opening address here at Boom Time. And can I start by acknowledging country and pay my respects to elders both past and present. Also, can I acknowledge and thank the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue for the work that they do across our community in terms of advocating for the development of Western Sydney. I've said before to many of you, we're in unprecedented and uncharted territory. Never before in the state's history has transport spent $1 billion a month to try and revitalise and transform this great state. It hasn't happened by accident. It's not the new norm, I can assure you of that. And one of the things that has happened is certainly the way in which we've gone about it as a government is something which has generated a lot of interest across the world. It's a great joy and privilege to be here this morning with the senior official who's been steering this in Tim Reardon, who I'm very pleased to see here. Tim, of course, is no longer the Secretary of Transport as of last week. He's now the Secretary of the Department of Premier and Cabinet. We couldn't have a better person now guiding the government in terms of where we need to go next. And we are at a point, I think, now in our history where there is some very real opportunities for everybody in terms of where we take the state. A fortnight ago, I had the opportunity to travel to the US and experience firsthand what's happening in places like San Francisco. And the reason I raise it is because a fortnight ago I sat in a fully autonomous vehicle around the streets of San Francisco. The company concerned who was showcasing their product is a company called Zoox. ZOOX, and they have developed a fully autonomous vehicle. And to be able to sit in that vehicle in the knowledge that in the next few years we will see the scaling up of mobility as a service and a complete change in the way in which motor vehicles will move in and around cities, it really impressed upon me the need to ensure that our mass transit in many ways integrates well with our first mile, last mile transport system. And that's where I think autonomy and autonomous vehicles is very much going to come into it. As part of that, we've started something special now, and that is the development of a metro network across Sydney, which ultimately will be the way in which people will, I think, transport themselves across the city. But at the same time, we've got to change our thinking in terms of the way in which our suburbs will develop, our precincts will develop, and certainly in terms of Western Sydney, that third city in terms of the Parkland city, which the Greater Sydney Commission have identified. So you've all seen, no doubt, the way in which the government went about announcing the future transport strategy and the Greater Sydney Commission strategy in an integrated way, so that we can develop the city so that 70% of people who live in Sydney come 2036 live in a 30-minute city. So therein lies the opportunity in terms of the investments we start to make in terms of metro. We have to keep in mind the way in which technology is going to transform our transport network and very much change the way in which people think about transport. I mean, it is a technology business. And then at the same time, making sure that in terms of our growth strategies, that we do it well. We should be about balanced development in this city. Balanced development in a way in which we strike a chord with community expectation in terms of density and the very different housing types that people want to live in versus the need for growth, keeping the economy strong, keeping the construction sector strong, and keeping ourselves focused in terms of a virtuous cycle of infrastructure investment, which might be underpinned by value sharing / value capture, versus greater certainty in terms of the way in which Canberra and the states work together in terms of infrastructure financing. And of course, one strategy that we've been deploying very much from a state perspective in terms of recycling capital. My political opponents tell me all the time that we're a government that has gone and sold everything off. Well, that's untrue. In 2011, the state's asset base was $225 billion. Now, we've apparently gone and sold everything. Well, interestingly, the state's asset base today is now $325 billion. We're investing in productive assets. congestion-busting assets for the people of Western Sydney. Come Sunday, we're changing the timetable. The biggest investment in rail services for the people of Western Sydney in the state's history. We've invested $1.5 billion, generating hundreds of jobs in new transport workers. And at the same time, we're seeing the South West get an uplift in train services around 91%. Parramatta, 44%. Penrith, 22%. We're getting the network to a point where it's almost a turn-up-and-go service. No need for a timetable in the peaks. A train every 3 minutes out of Parramatta into the city. A reduction massively in terms of the frequency of the trains from Penrith in. And yet this is happening before we even start to see the metro come to life. The other day I took a decision to turn off a free transport service in Wollongong. People were angry about it. But the front page of the Illawarra Mercury read, the minister's crazy, he believes in driverless trains. Well, little alone does the Illawarra Mercury know, but the first driverless train in Australia is actually sitting at Cudgegong Road right now. And it'll be fully operational in the first half of 2019. This 66-kilometre line, which will extend from Cudgegong Road, through Rouse Hill, through all the stations to Chatswood, will be up and running as a first stage of a metro system in 2019, first half. It has the potential to deliver a train every 2 minutes as we see the growth in the city. The government, of course, is also now bringing down 18 buildings in the city here, where we will extend via twin tunnels the metro from Chatswood to Sydenham. There's enormous scope and opportunity for the way in which we will see development in and around stations happen, and so we should. This is not overdevelopment, this is sensible development. 4 contracts will be issued as part of the metro system between Chatswood and Sydenham for the purposes of overstation development, as it should. This is a space the government doesn't necessarily need to play in. We should be getting the balance right between residential, commercial and retail opportunities around metro stations. And then, of course, we're going to metrify the line out to Bankstown, where I'm hearing criticism. Why wouldn't you want a modern-day driverless train servicing your region? I do not understand the critics in terms of Bankstown. The main reason we're going to Bankstown is because there is a massive choke point at Sydenham. We're able to build greater capacity in the existing heavy rail network if we take the metro train to Bankstown and untangle the spaghetti bowl of lines, particularly at Sydenham. And the travel time improvements are enormous. The frequency of trains are incredible. And it means that people are spending less dwell time on station platforms and more time getting to where they need to. The 4th stage of the metro is one which will excite this room, and that's Metro West. We're in the midst of engaging with industry and community in terms of the Metro West project. So far, the government stipulated the need for a project which will extend the metro from the CBD to Parramatta. Ideally, I want to see a travel time around the 16, 17, 18 minute mark between the 2 CBDs. But we're going to the community with a very clear intent of building stations at the Bays Precinct and at Sydney Olympic Park. And then we want to hear back from the community as to where else we should be putting those stations. One that's come up already is Westmead. Now, the beauty with the Metro West project is come 2031, we cannot physically get people onto trains from Western Sydney into the city. Come 2031, the load capacities in the AM peak on that line will be in excess of 200%. You physically can't get people onto trains. That's the growth that's happening in Western Sydney. So we have to invest in a new train line. We have to double that capacity. And that is the highest priority for this city. Yes, it's important we get rail connectivity right to Western Sydney Airport. The government's playing in that space with Canberra in that regard. But from my perspective, this is the number one project for the city over the next 10 years. And if you think about its effect, if we can transform the precincts between here and Parramatta, we can see Parramatta grow in central Sydney to be an incredible city that has the potential to grow to. And then, of course, we look at the connectivity to that third city out around the Aerotropolis. We have an enormous opportunity to see the city grow and grow well planned, which hasn't always been the case. So from my perspective, working with Canberra, both in terms of the airport and rail connectivity, is important, but also looking to work with Canberra in terms of how we might grow Western Sydney as a result of Metro West is also critical. These are fully driverless autonomous trains, 3 doors on the side. They carry 46,000 people per hour compared to the existing heavy rail network at 24,000. We have enormous development opportunities in and around the stations as we roll this program out. Comes at a time when the government's also investing in light rail, and again I have to acknowledge the leadership of the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue when it came to the delivery of that Western Sydney light rail project in and around Parramatta, and also extending to the Olympic Park precinct. The leadership that was shown, particularly when it relates to the financing of it, is something which is really important. And I just want to touch on that and touch on Chris Brown and the work that he's done to advocate very sensibly for value capture. I mean, in essence, what we're talking about is that if investors and developers are going to receive a significant windfall gain off the back of infrastructure being in the locality of their development, and we can roll out more infrastructure more quickly, it makes sense for the taxpayer and the investor to share in that net uplift, to share in that net gain. Because ultimately it generates wealth, generates jobs, but it also improves ultimately the quality of life of people who are living within those developments. We're seeing this work incredibly well around the world. We shouldn't shy from the debate. There's various forms of value capture that can be applied, but it's one which we shouldn't shy away from. Because eventually, ultimately, governments will make decisions which, rightly or wrongly, could lead to a slowing down of the economy. I don't want to see that. We've been putting our foot on the accelerator. We've got to stay the course. I'm not prepared to see politics destroy this state's infrastructure program. I'm not interested in people who want to rip up contracts. I'm not interested in people who want to oppose things for the sake of opposing them. WestConnex, NorthConnex, light rail projects, Metro. My political opponents are opposed to them. Well, what's that about? This is a program which has had independent assurance. This is a program which our community needs. This is a program which is going to continue to drive the state's productivity. And we should stay the course. So I'm very excited. I think it's a tremendous opportunity ahead in terms of the development of the city and the state if we stay the course. And I know that certainly in terms of the boom time ahead, we are incredibly well placed. Thanks a lot.
I'm Andrew Clennell from The Australian, and I'm about to have a discussion with the Minister. I see he was pretty fervent there and might have taken his angry pills. I've taken my angrier pills because it just cost me a $60 cab fare to come here from Kingsford, thanks to your CBD Light Rail Minister. So good news...
What's your property price going to be when it's in?
That's what Gladys used to say to me. But the good news is the cabbie heard me on the phone. He knew that you were the Transport Minister, so that's good, name recognition. And he said, oh yes, I understand that light rail's over budget. So let me ask you about that one first. It's well known at the time, it might have even been reported in The Australian that you labelled, or you and your office thought it was, quote, a dog of a project. Is it a dog of a project? Why do we need this thing which will take longer to get into town than the buses do?
Well, thank you for your introduction, Andrew. Always great to see you, and I'm glad you're at The Australian now.
I'm sure you are.
But look, in terms of the light rail project, ultimately the project is going to remove around 220 buses off city streets. Buses will still operate, so you'll still be able to obviously use bus transport in the eastern suburbs. But most importantly, in terms of the project, it is going to change the thinking around the city. It's not a project happening in isolation. We've got the Metro project happening as well. And interestingly, in terms of the project, I have every confidence when it's up and running that we will see the city transform. It will be well patronised. We'll be able to run shuttle services to and from Moore Park. At the same time, we'll have a transport solution which, in an integrated way with the bus network and the metro network and the interchange hub at both Central and at Circular Quay, it'll be tremendous. We've seen around $40 billion of DAs come forward to the City of Sydney with this project going ahead. Same's happened in Newcastle, where we're putting light rail in there. And I dare say, in terms of Western Sydney, we'll see the same form of transformation of precincts there once light rail goes in.
But it's full from day one, this light rail, isn't it? I mean, it's like you're saying to people, let's develop here, but we've got a light rail, not a metro. It's kind of like you're at capacity when you start.
Well, one of the interesting things is that, and if you look at the future transport document, we're actually and can give consideration to extending the Metro West to your part of the world. You might smile, but that document alone is identifying 200 kilometres of metro network for Sydney.
Well, let me ask you about the metro, because I heard you defend the Bankstown line before. Why do we need to spend billions of dollars to put a metro where a rail line already exists? Surely the West Metro, to do the northwest and then the west, would have made more sense. Why are we doing this?
Well, first of all, in terms of that line, it's firstly an old line. 5 of the stations have no access for people with disabilities and mums and dads with prams, so there's that opportunity to transform access in the stations. But the point that I keep making is that the reason it's going to Bankstown is because at Sydenham, the lines are like a bowl of spaghetti. And what it does is, in essence, improves the T8 line, it improves the T4 line, the South Coast line, once you put the metro in. At the same time, the people along that line do deserve modern-day trains, and ultimately, again referring to the future transport document, there's the ability to expand even further into the southwest with metro into the future. So this is the first line of a network. We're building the first line of a network, and politicians into the future will be making decisions as to where the future network should expand. We've set it out now. The future transport document has the metro network of the future. 200 k's of metro line. We'll see new lines potentially from a Cogra to a Parramatta, from a Rouse Hill to a Parramatta, from the city to a Maroubra. That's the type of planning and insight that we need now in order to allow the city to breathe and grow, and we can tackle congestion.
I think few would disagree that it's the biggest infrastructure undertaking any state government has done, what's happening in Sydney at the moment, and that's awesome. But it makes you wonder why this government is only ahead in the polls, published polls, about 51-49 on two-party preferred. I mean, what do you have to do? You must be sort of thinking. I mean, why is it that you might lose the election when you are doing so much in terms of infrastructure?
Look, I'll leave the commentary to people like yourselves in that regard, but the observation I would make to the community is that it hasn't happened by accident. I mean, we put our political butts on the line when we moved on poles and wires. I was Treasurer at the time, and it was necessary to get the headroom in the infrastructure spend to get this state moving. And by recycling capital like we have, taking lazy assets on our balance sheet, on the state's balance sheet, getting the private sector in to run those assets, monetise the future capital flow, invest into an infrastructure fund called Restart, and then put it and pump it into projects like the Metro is really important. So $7 billion of the poles and wires transaction has gone directly into the Metro. And the interest in the way that we've done it, it's incredible. Like for the first time, I appeared before the House Committee on Infrastructure and Transport in Capitol Hill in Washington a fortnight ago, and everyone is talking about what we've done here in Sydney in terms of recycling capital. The super funds are wanting to invest. The private sector wants to bring the expertise to manage these lazy assets, and they're typically regulated assets, so that gives us coverage in terms of protecting pricing. And then, of course, for us as a government to be able to invest sensibly with benefit cost ratios of 1+ into new and productive infrastructure has set this state up now for a long time.
Fair enough, but just bringing you back to the question, why are the polls so close? You know, I mean, what do you have to do? What is it? Are you seen as just a bunch of greedy bankers? A bunch of pro-development characters? Well, you know,
I've never worked for a bank or a developer, but
the predecessor as Premier, but like, why do you think it is that you're not bringing the community with you on this stuff? Are they fearful of the population growth, overdevelopment?
Look, I think, you know, ultimately, you know, we're now into our second term, midway through. We haven't lost a news poll in 10 years.
Yeah, I'll give you that. But
yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, well...
Is it greyhounds, you know?
And I think we've got a fantastic leader and team. I mean, Gladys is seen across the community as someone who's incredibly hardworking, you know, and that is a trait of hers which is, you know, incredible. It's conveyed, and I think once we get into an election period, you know, we will see the typical presidential style politics at play. But the reality is that you put the politics to one side and look at what we're doing in a policy sense. I think the community will move with us. The other thing is that, you know, there's a lot of volatility in the vote at the moment. There's a lot of people who feel that they're disenfranchised. I sense this as a regional MP. People want to be part of the story. They want to enjoy the uplift that we're all enjoying. They don't want to be left behind. So as a government, we're now investing in local infrastructure to ensure that every community benefits. And it wouldn't matter if you're in the back of Western Sydney or in a place like Bega. That's how we're going about our job. We're just heads down, tail up. We've got an incredibly unified team, and we're getting on with the job. And you know, you compare that to what's happening in other tiers of government, it's pretty much chalk and cheese.
Yeah. We had a Channel 9 news story the other night which pointed out that if you wanted to come into the city from Liverpool in 1975, the year of the dismissal, it took you about half an hour on the express. There's now no express. It takes you 54 minutes. Is this government too Parramatta focused when it thinks about Western Sydney and not thinking about places like Liverpool and how you can get in?
No, it's rubbish. I only wish that story had conveyed everything that I'd said, because I said very clearly that station alone is going to receive an extra 410 services. I mean, across the board, we are driving greater frequency in the way in which trains are moving across the network. Liverpool's no exception to that. We've got the Cumberland line in terms of Liverpool, which is going to deliver, you know, a service north-south in Western Sydney, 150 additional services, particularly at late nights and on weekends where there's extra demand. We've got 250 services going into that line, more frequency in terms of the trains. Less people standing around on platforms, more people on trains moving. So, you know, I think it's a bit of a myth to go and the best one I can point to is the Leader of the Opposition saying, oh, you know, I've got a station in my electorate which in 1930, you know, had a quicker travel time. Well, they only had 5 trains a day go through that station. Look at the service frequency now. You know, there's 5 trains an hour. So let's get real. The city is changing. We've got to change with it. We had an 11% increase in patronage on Sydney trains last year. I've had to rush the procurement of 24 brand new Waratah trains to arrive next year to cater for that growth. In 1 year alone. 21% patronage expected over the next 3 years alone across the rail network. We're investing $1.5 billion in new substations, sidings, signalling, to try and increase the capacity of the existing infrastructure to cater for the growth. So, you know, look, I think the key point is that if you've got a 91% increase in services in southwest Sydney, that's not a bad outcome as a result of this timetable change.
Well, let me ask you about this tolls announcement the other day, because as I understand it, you took it to Cabinet, Stuart Ayres, or Gladys took it to Cabinet.
Yeah, I read your story.
You were heavily involved. And,
who told you about it?
Oh, well, you know. You have to check my phone records. But look, the bottom line is you spend $1,300 on tolls and you'll get 358 back in your rego. I mean, you could have done cash back. Presumably, the sale price of the WestConnex wouldn't have been as high if you'd done that. How did you come to the decision to do it this way? And does it really shift a vote, or do people just say, thanks for that, I'm still angry about the tolls, I'll vote against you anyway?
Okay, can I tackle this in two ways? First of all, through the cost of living, and second, through the building of infrastructure.
Sure.
The reality is that if you want the infrastructure today, you've got to have it paid for. I mean, governments can borrow, governments can recycle capital, as we're doing with the WestConnex project, where we're building it in stages and recycling the capital through it and on-selling it in terms of tolling concessions, but also in terms of tolls. The reality is that tolls help over a concession period to pay for the infrastructure. Now, people can either wait till governments get enough money in the bank into the future and then potentially build the asset. And it's amiss of me to not acknowledge Duncan Gay, who's sitting here, as my former parliamentary colleague and ministerial colleague. But ultimately, tolls are there to assist finance these assets. So for the M4 toll that's gone on just recently with obviously the additional lanes, the tolls there are contributing towards the cost of building that magical tunnel, which will go under Parramatta Road. And that's what everybody's crying out for. In terms of NorthConnex, I couldn't point to a more popular road project than NorthConnex. Everybody wants to get off Pennant Hills Road. They want to go through a tunnel, enjoy the 15-minute time saving as a result of not being in traffic. And the toll on that motorway is going to be the same as the M2. So ultimately, governments need to invest, and obviously we've got other things that we also need to do across government. We could go and take the entire operational budget and the capital budget of government and plough it into building motorways. We've got other things to do, like running hospitals and schools and police stations. The next point in terms of cost of living, if you were to put cash back on, you can only really put it on one motorway. What we've done is actually invested in a program which is going to benefit everybody. With NorthConnex coming on, obviously the West Harbour Tunnel and Beaches Link into the future, the F6, the M5, the M4, WestConnex, NorthConnex. Ultimately, if there is a benefit derived through someone using the motorways, obviously on a daily and consistent basis, that makes sense. And that's what this government is doing and recognising. And we all recognise cost of living pressures, particularly on families in Western Sydney, particularly with the advent in terms of retail and wholesale pressures when it relates to electricity. And what we've done here is obviously put an incentive in place to obviously recognise the cost of living pressure.
But how do you think that plays in the bush? I mean, Troy Grant apparently pointed this out in Cabinet, as I pointed out as well. I mean, are people in the country where you need to win seats as well going to say, well, Sydney gets everything, they get all the infrastructure, and now they get free car rego as well?
Well, certainly in terms of the infrastructure spend in regional New South Wales, I mean, take Bega, where I come from, brand new hospital, brand new Eden Port, brand new airports, major investments on the Princes Highway.
Well, they're lucky to have you as a local member.
Yeah, well, the same goes for Dubbo.
Infrastructure Minister.
Yeah, well, South Coast, Kiama, Monero, Albury, Wagga.
But
there's $13 billion going into the bush, right? And yeah, you're right. Okay, it'd be very easy to say, oh, everything's happening in Sydney. Well, people from the country are quite in tune with this. What they do know is that if Sydney doesn't work, and it's we're losing $9 billion per annum in economic loss because of congestion, everybody is interested in tackling congestion, and at the same time, people are seeing infrastructure being delivered in the bush. So that's happening.
Okay, but I mean, even as a journalist, I hear this government's about Sydney. People say that to you. They certainly say it on the online comments on our stories. Do you hear that in your electorate? Do you have to counter that with locals, or have you done so much in your electorate as infrastructure minister that you don't hear that so much?
No, to be honest with you, where I think it comes back to my point, there's people in the country who are feeling a little bit disenfranchised by the way in which politics is working out. Doesn't necessarily have to be an infrastructure spend or what's happening in the cities. If politicians are not relating to their local communities, they'll punish you. And, you know, there's a very real sensitivity here, and it's emanating particularly nationally at the moment. We're now seeing, in terms of the volatility of the vote in the bush in particular, you know, people willing to send a message. They want their local member to be in there fighting for them, and that's the reality in terms of politics in the bush. Yes, people will occasionally say, oh yeah, everything's happening in Sydney, and then when you point out what's going on around them, they go, oh yeah, that's a good point. You know, we're putting a lot of things out there, the reduction in compulsory third-party insurance, you know, the $100 rebate for kids' sport. These types of things have a real effect in terms of helping the household budget, and that happens in regional New South Wales as it does in Western Sydney. So, you know, I think people sense the state is heading in the right direction. They're confident in the direction we're taking, and we're going to stay the course.
Now, just a final question, because we're over time. You mentioned value capture, but we haven't heard a lot of that recently. We haven't heard in relation to Parramatta Light Rail much about that happening, or much about levies on people to pay for things. Is that now in the background? Is the Premier sort of less keen on that than you are?
No, because we're embedding it into every business case that we now develop on infrastructure. It's being applied in terms of Parramatta. It'll certainly be applied in and around the airport when it comes to the rail project there, I dare say. I mean, Canberra are very keen on it. And ultimately, you know, we're sensitive. I mean, this is not a shining brand new tax. This is about sharing in the value uplift associated with infrastructure, so we can build more. And in many sense, it's about raising more money to do more in a hypothecated way, so people know where the funds are going towards. They know which project it's going towards. The only other observation I'd make in terms of value capture is that my sense out of it is that it can only ever really work in its true form in and around metro stations. Yes, we have a special infrastructure contribution applied through planning with the light rail project, but into the future, you know, in terms of value capture, I can see it really working in and around metro stations. More broadly, I'm not so convinced. So, you know, I think the key point is politicians need to deal with it on a case-by-case basis. They've got to take the investment community with them when they embed it into that business case. Everyone gets on the same page in terms of the infrastructure that's being built. Then that way we can move into a truly virtuous cycle of infrastructure investment in this state and not be at the whim of political games.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt from talking to you that you're all over it, and we're probably lucky to have you as Transport Minister, and that's the nicest thing I'll ever say to you. So please thank the Minister for his time this morning.